Welcome to Comics Oddities. My name is Eric, and today we're going to talk about dirty plot. Now you may be wondering, what is a dirty plot? Well, yes, if you guessed correctly, it is French-Canadian Quebecois slang for dirty, stanky. We're talking like Arby's roast beef style stank. But also, and in this case today, it is a popular comic book series from the 1990s by a Canadian cartoonist, Julie Doucet. I have with me the collection of all 12 issues of Dirty Plot, and we're gonna go and flip through. We're gonna get my grubby hands on these pages. We're gonna flip through it. We're gonna talk about it. Julie Doucet, at her time, she was like one of the biggest cartoonists. All the big named Mount Rushmore of cartoonists were like, Julie Doucet is the best. We're talking Dan Klaus, Art Spiegelman, Seth, all the guys with like the big horn-rimmed glasses and the bad posture. All those guys were like, Julie Doucet is great. And even myself, I will say, you know, I read this, I've read a couple floppies of Dirty Plot before this, but reading this as a whole, I'm like, man, you know, this is one of my favorite comics. It is up here. It is up there. So we're gonna dive through today, talk about this awesome book. And maybe, you know, you want to pick it up and give it a try and read this comic. I definitely recommend it. So Dirty Plot, it was one of the first comics published by Drawn and Quarterly, which is like a big publisher now, but at the time was kind of just like this little zine of people publishing stuff and they didn't really know what they were doing. It started out as like 12 issues from 1990 to 1998. Most of them in 1991. I don't know why. I think she was just like kind of burning the midnight oil at the time. So yeah, Dirty Plot, it's kind of like a Autobio comic, but there's like a lot of surrealist fantasy dream sequences in it. And it has this very kind of playful but subversive sense of humor. There's a lot of like gross out, shocking, kind of weirdo, bizarre gags that I love, and it's kind of, you know, kind of like it's like a predecessor of Adult Swim kind of stuff. Like for instance, one of the first little comics on here is like Julie Doucet in bed, and she's on her period, but she's afraid if she'll get up out of bed, all her period blood will like get all over the bed. So she like levitates with her mind out of the bed and is just like hovering over the ground. She goes into her bathroom, goes upside down over her head, and then her period blood like leaks into the toilet. A lot of people wrote to her about this and was like, this is disgusting, this is gross, make all the dick jokes you want, but don't talk about menstruation. It's also this running gag with this character named Martin who's like taking a bath, and he uses all this like gross bath water and he dumps cereal in it and then ferments it and then puts like his dirty clothes in there. When he's fermenting it, he turns it into this beer and he sells it. And like as the gag goes on, he becomes this like rich entrepreneur from making this beer that is like made out of his own bath water. There's all sorts of like continuing gags, and they're always very strange and bizarre in here, but they also kind of tie into like Julie Doucet's actual world. Like there's this running comic, it's one of my favorites in this series, and it's Monkey and the Living Dead. It stars like her actual cats at the time, but they're kind of treated like anthropomorphic humans. Like Monkey is just like this really innocent, naive girl, and then the Living Dead's like this kind of like cracked out homeless cat who's like jerking off all the time and busting loads. And then there's like the mama cat, Charlotte. And then at one point, Monkey becomes this like stripper and star, and she ends up like hooking up with the Living Dead, who's like actually her dad. It's very strange and kind of gross. There's also like tons of like really bizarre dream sequences within these comics. Like they're like on almost every issue. Like I don't know what Julie Doucet's eating or smoking to cause these dreams, but they're insane. Like one of them, like she's just like walking down the street and then some guy injects like heroin into her eye. There's one where like she gets hunted down in this like post-apocalyptic world, and this man makes her eat a croissant out of his underwear, and there's like a mysterious liquid that comes out of the croissant, and you think it's like semen or something at first, but then it turns out to just be butter, and she's like, buttery croissant. Also, one of them, my favorite, is she's going on a rocket ship to space, and then her mom's there, and her mom's gives her a plate of cookies and tells her that these cookies are masturbation cookies, and then she ends up masturbating with these cookies in space, and then I think eating one of them. Yeah, so this is like kind of the caliber of these comics. Not for the faint of heart, definitely. I can't stress enough the artwork in these comics. Beautifully rendered. There's so much detail in every panel. It's like ridiculous. Like there's almost too much detail. Some comics they would have like dialogue, and then a big panel of detail, but this comic's like every panel is just full with little details and scratches and inklings in them. Not having read this comic before too, it's kind of like a missing link for a lot of other things that I've seen. Like it reminds me a lot of like Mark Bell's comics, just all the little details in there. And the art style, it's very unique, especially for the time. And I heard that the reason why that is because Julie Doucet didn't really read comics before this. She wasn't really familiar with underground comics, so she was kind of just doing it her own way. So there is this kind of like 80s, 90s look to it. It kind of reminds me of Nicktoons a little bit. Like maybe that's just me, but just like the font and the kind of like different patterns and stuff like that, and the thickness of the line. I will say the paneling and all the details in there, it can almost be a little too much sometimes. Instinctually, I want to stop and look at every panel, but also this is a thick fucking book. I mean, it's like I don't got time for that shit. I got a lot of books to read, bruh. So with each one of these issues of Dirty Plot too, like the style changes a little bit more, and you can see how it kind of evolves into something different. Julie Doucet is one of those artists who's like, I feel like constantly trying to change things and trying to try new things, which is cool and adventurous and fun to read. There's a couple issues where she's like doing this kind of a painted style, like without the heavy line art, it looks like almost painted. I'm not entirely sure what materials she used, but it looks like almost acrylic or something. Also, I'll mention there's a comic I really like in here where Julie's at a table and she's like saying grace, and she's like, Jesus, oh Lord Jesus, I wish your blood is turned to wine and your flesh is turned to bread. And then it pans out and they're like actually eating Jesus, and like you could see like he's like his wangs out and everything. Now, one of the cool things about these comics are the covers. I mean, the covers are just amazing. There's a lot of collage aspect to it. Like Julie Doucet is like really into collage as well. And in her later work, she has some books where it's just completely made out of collage cutouts, and there's all these like kind of random surrealist phrases put together that don't make a lot of sense. Kind of like an avant-garde collage pictorial book. You can see like a glimpse of this in these covers. One in particular that I love is like Julie's like playing guitar, and there's like this sort of roasted chicken playing guitar with her, and there's all these like real faces posted on these like cartoon bodies who are like bopping around and dancing. There's also like a cover that's like very Daniel Klaus kind of inspired. There's these like up and close like stiff shots of Julie's face, and they're all in like kind of different colors with like different patterns. Now I'm going to have to mention issue 6 of Dirty Plot, because this is a very special issue, because it's very progressive for its time. And so in this entire issue, Julie is like turned into a man. It's like different separate sections of Julie as a man. All of this comes down to, I heard an interview, because of her sense of like gross sense of humor, she feels very boyish and kind of like kind of manly, so she kind of relates to that in a way. But by far the craziest comic in this issue, which is just compiled of all these like Julie as a man centric epilogues, is where Julie's dreaming, and because she can see like a separate version of herself through a mirror, and through that mirror, like that version of herself becomes a man, and she ends up having like sex with herself as a man, which is very bizarre and very shocking and just kind of strange. And this is like a dream she's had. Like I said, she does a lot of comics that are based on like just weird dreams she's had. But as the dirty plot issues start to progress, there's less of the kind of surrealist fantasy dream-like sequences, and it becomes more like based on reality. It's like Autobio comics, but they're good Autobio comics. Some Autobio comics can be a little boring and monotonous and like self-centered, but these are done well. But I do really miss that kind of surrealist wackiness that she had earlier on that she kind of lost. But you know, she's progressing, doing something different, and instead of just doing the same thing over and over again. For instance, she has like a story of like losing her virginity. There's like a story of like, you know, going to art school and all the different friends and like lovers she had in art school. And there's one where she's in a hospital and she meets some guy and they end up like escaping the hospital together, kind of this like romance on a whim story. Then we have issues 10 through 12 of Dirty Plot, aka Purdy Plot. It's the kind of the new name she goes with, where she kind of serialized this one story called My New York Diary, which is a true story of Julie Doucet moving to New York from Montreal after meeting this guy who was like a pen pal of hers, and they end up kind of striking up some sort of romance. This story starts out as this like kind of love story. It's like too good to be true, this guy, and she's kind of doing something exciting and new for the first time, just moving out to this big city. But as it goes on, like this romance starts to become more and more toxic, and he's kind of like pulling Julie Doucet down. There's kind of this like jealousy dynamic because he's also a cartoonist, but he's not as successful as Julie. So there's this sort of negativity and jealousness going on. But he also kind of just does nothing. He doesn't have a job. He's on Social Security, and he's kind of just like doing whippets and drugs all day. You kind of see as this comic as this like toxic relationship unfolds. And I know saying this out loud, it kind of sounds like some shitty soap opera or something, but if you read it yourself, it's actually really good. I was really hooked while reading it. It kind of reminds me of some, you know, relationships I've had in the past. This was actually written while like the early issues of A Dirty Plot were going on, so it's kind of cool getting to see behind the scenes of what's going on and like kind of just a snapshot of somebody's life. So here's the sad part. Shortly after issue 12, Julie Doucet kind of just stopped making comics entirely. She sort of just fell off the earth of the whole comic scene. Like a Bill Watterson scenario. She kind of just felt like the comics were all work and no pay, and she didn't really get the recognition that she deserved. She thought she was just making comics 24/7 all the time and never really got to have a life outside of that. Which is really sad because I think her comics are really good. But at the same time, you know, if her heart's not in it, then why do it? She feels like she's an artist first from a cartoonist, and why stick to one medium where you can keep moving and trying different things out? Like I said earlier, her collage and you know, her paintings, and she did animation as well. But anyway, that does it for this video. Please like and subscribe if you can. Remember to get plenty of exercise, eat your vegetables, and have a great day.
Initiate mass destruction. Kill the poor.